I have some wire edge coming up that I'm going to do. I need to do some more practice on it. The problem is that I don't have a dolly set up to help me prepare for the wire edge. That's one of the issues that I'm having. This dolly here has got a shape really similar to one that I've seen other people using for wire edge on vintage cars. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to figure out the radiuses and everything that I need in order to set up for the wire edge. And we're going to change this dolly into a wire edge dolly. This is the dolly that inspired what we're doing. So here's the purpose of the dolly. I have two panels required to make up a part. They're going to have bead rolled images onto them. And I don't want the end to just be two raw pieces of sheet metal finished together. I also want the edge of the part to be a lot stiffer than normal. So I want to put a wire in it, but I want to hide the fact that it's two panels. I kind of want it to look like one panel. So we're going to have the minimum bend radius for the material thickness down here, and then at the top we're going to have just the beginning of the wire radius, and that'll be what's formed right here on the 45, so that we can make both panels and then dry assemble them, and then after they're riveted we can then close the wire around it. I can't really do this on the brake because some of the parts are curved in both directions, so I think the best way to do it is with a hammer and dolly. And this is kind of the rough idea for the dolly shape. It's going to have the minimum radius and then the radius to get around the wire. Just leave it at a 45 for right now. One of the things we're going to need to do this is a gauge. So what I've done is I've laid out a 90 degree on this side, and then I've laid out a 90 degree plus a material thickness and then a 45 out. And I've punched holes which represent the minimum bend radius of my material. Now I'm just going to use an 1/8 inch diameter punch hole, which will give me a 1 times thickness for the 063 that I'm using. And that should be fine for 3003 and 5052, which is what I usually work in. Now on this side, I've done it twice. One for the minimum bend radius to come up, then I've laid out 063, and then I've punched it again, and that second punch is the diameter of the wire that I'm going to be using. And then I've laid out a line 45 degrees up and out, and that'll be where we start for setting up for this wire. And this will make a gauge so that we can be consistent when we go to reshape this dolly. Now that we have our gauge made, I've came in and I've just kind of given myself a rough line for a rough amount of material that just needs to come out for now. So I'm going to rough off this with a cut wheel. I could probably do it in a bandsaw with this irregular shape. I don't think that's the safest option. So I'm going to rough that out with a cut wheel real quick, and then we can go from there. Here we are. I've just removed that large lump of material off of it to make it easier. There's still plenty of material to work with in order to create what we're going to create. I do plan on putting it in the mill and milling that bottom flat. So I'm not taking too much material right now, just getting it roughed in until we can get it on the mill. And there is a radius on that profile, and I want to keep that radius. Not all the parts that we're going to be doing are straight, so that little bit of radius will help us work around some curves for the convex parts. And as long as I don't take and make it too convex, we'll also be able to work concave parts with it as well. So I took a high removal rate grinder, and I've gotten it, made sure that I was at a decent even radius. 3.5 inch radius is probably going to be the tightest I'll ever use. Most of it's probably going to be 8 or 10 inch radius. Then I've roughed it in coming up on that same plane. So now I'll paint it with a little bit of Dykem, hit it with the file, kind of blend it together a little bit better. But I'm going to wait for the real shaping it in until after I have this bottom milled flat. So that's where we're at. There's a little low spot still right there, but other than that, it's fairly uniform and shaped in. But after some thought, instead of just flattening the whole bottom, what I did is I flattened a section. And what that'll allow me to do is I can tip the dolly like that. And it'll give me room, since I'm using this mostly with aluminum, it'll give me room to try and put a rag on the back side and only index on the front leading edge. And hopefully keep from metal to metal contact on the an area that might be seen. I know for the most part everything should be hidden for about 1.5 inches back. So by leaving the rag there, that'll be fine. So I did the same thing. I took the grinder and rough flattened it, and then I took the file and started to cut it nice and flat. It still needs a little bit of work, but it's really close. So now I'm going to work both edges, the top and the bottom, and start to ease all of this off per my 45-degree pattern. So now with the Dykem on it and dry, what I can do, I can take my pattern and just scrape it. And it's going to remove the Dykem where I need to start sanding and grinding and filing. Just by holding it as flat as I can with the bottom and scraping across. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep it aimed on roughly that 3.5 inch and swipe it like that. So now I can remove some material here and start blending it in and get it to where my pattern fits a lot easier. So now I've set up the burnisher as a bench grinder on the edge of the fixture table. I'm using 80 grit, and I'll start sanding in one direction, and then I'll turn 90 degrees to it until I have all the scratches out except for the 80 grit scratches. And once I have that on all the faces, then I will switch to 120 grit and work from there. The same thing, turning it 90 degrees, getting all the scratches out, turning it 90 degrees, making sure I have everything to the 180 grit, and then moving on. Here I am buffing it after 180 grit. You could take it to 200 or 400 grit and get a much better polish and finish. The better your finish, the less chances there are of putting marks into the material as you're using the hammer and dolly. So there it is. That's about the minimum probably of what that dolly should be, working aluminum and stuff. We're just going to give it a good test drive and see if it does what we need it to do. And we'll go from there. We'll make modifications as needed. But it has a nice little bit of crown right there, which is what we need. It's got a decent finish. And hopefully I've got the layout right. And we can put a wire edge on a doubled up piece of 063. So there it is.